A young girl walks along a river. The air is cold to the skin in the cool summer months. Step after step, she looks for small shells along the rocks. Shells which could be made into beautiful jewelry. None are found, though. As she walks back to her home, her tribe is preparing a meal. A meal of a local deer and various plants scavenged from the area. But her home is strange. It's a cave. A cave full of strange-looking people. A people with long heads and stocky bodies. Uniformity lacks within the group itself. It seems to be made up of two distinct groups. But nevertheless, she fits into this odd bunch, for her mother is a Neanderthal and her father is Denisovan, a band of different human species. Unfortunately, she would soon die, never reaching adulthood. Though her fate was grim, she would leave behind a single fossil for another species of human to find 90,000 years later. She would be named Deni, a girl only known by a single bone fragment about 2 centimeters long. Though not a very impressive find at first sight, DNA analysis has been able to discover many fascinating things about this fossil. Dating analysis from 2016 determined that this individual died out about 90,000 years ago. The bone fragment's characteristics indicate an age of at least 13 years. She had survived childhood, but perhaps fell sick, was wounded, or starved to death. It was found in the now famous Denisova cave located in the Denisova Valley, Siberia, Russia. Deni lived a very long time ago, a time when many species of humans still roam the earth, and she herself was a hybrid of two now long extinct species. Through DNA, we know her mother was a Neanderthal and that her father was Denisovan. Finds such as this show us how complicated the human story really is. Many different species intermixing to create fertile hybrids which then can mix even more. In this new series, I will cover every human species currently known in detail. The field of paleoanthropology is very complicated and ever-changing. Many topics are hotly debated and will change and become outdated. Today, I will cover the mysterious Denisovans, or Homo denisova. If I say anything that is factually incorrect or outdated, then please correct me down below. There's so much to cover, so without further ado, let's get into it. The first evidence of these long-gone hominins was discovered in Denisova Cave, a strange cave that is brimming with history. It has been used by people in the region for thousands of years. In the 18th century, the cave was inhabited by a religious hermit named Denis. Little did he know his name would eventually become the name for a whole species of human. The cave was first inspected for fossils in the 1970s by Russian paleontologist Nikolai Vovodov, who was looking for remains of canids. So far, 22 strata have been identified with archaeological artifacts that cover from the time of Denis back to over 200,000 years ago. It wasn't until 2008 that Russian archaeologists investigated the cave and found the finger bone of a juvenile female, originally dating to 50 to 30,000 years ago. The estimate has since changed to 76,000 to 52,000 years ago. The specimen was originally named X-woman. Matrilineal mitochondrial DNA extracted from the bone demonstrated it belonged to an undiscovered species of hominin, genetically distinct from both modern humans and Neanderthals. A whole sect of humanity unknown until the discovery of a tiny bone. More recent dating in 2019 by Greek archaeologist Katerina Duka and colleagues gave further clarity on the age of the specimens found. The oldest specimen, Denisova II, lived anywhere between 123 and 195,000 years ago. Quite a wide margin as of now, but this date is still important. Based on artifacts also found in the cave, Hominin occupation most likely by Denisovans began over 280,000 years ago. A common misconception is that Homo sapiens were the first to leave Africa and conquer the world. This is something I once thought, and maybe many of you did as well. In reality, human species called much of Europe and Asia home long before our kin did. Interestingly, Neanderthals were also present 193 and 97,000 years ago, likely during the same time as Denisovans. Deni is dated around 90 to 100,000 years ago, so it makes sense that Neanderthals would have been there considering her mother was a Neanderthal. They could have been living there for much longer, but those are the only two dates that we currently have. Caves are great forms of shelter. Denisova Cave is a fairly large cave. It is 270 meters squared or 2,900 square feet. Located 700 meters or 2,300 feet above sea level, it is surrounded by a lush mountainous region, a region which is likely relatively the same even today. A river flows only 28 meters below and would have provided clean water and even fish to the cave's inhabitants. There is no wonder why people wanted to live here. Also, 100,000 years ago, the world was colder. The Earth had still not entered into the last glaciation, often called the Ice Age, but the weather was still colder. Having good shelter was crucial to survival. You could imagine hundreds of generations were born, lived, and died in this cave. People starved, hyenas attacked, and successful hunts were celebrated. Denisovans were living in this cave long before Homo sapiens had even left Africa. It is also fascinating to think that Neanderthals, a distinct species, lived and likely coexisted with Denisovans. We know from DNA that these hominins were quite different, but similar enough that we know they mated and produced viable offspring on numerous occasions. About 17% of the Denisovan genome is made up of Neanderthal DNA. It is fascinating to think about how they would have interacted. Currently, the fossils of 5 distinct Denisovan individuals from Denisova Cave have been identified through their ancient DNA. Denisova 2, 3, 4, 8, and 13. Denisova 11 is the fossil of Deni, the hybrid between a Neanderthal and a Denisovan. The actual fossil material consists of a finger bone, 3 molars, a partial mandible, an arm or leg fragment, and a parietal bone fragment. Because of such fragmentary evidence, much of what we know about these people comes from their DNA. All of these specimens came from Denisova Cave until 2019, when a research group described a partial mandible discovered in 1980 by a Buddhist monk. It was discovered on the Tibetan Plateau in Baixia Karst Cave located in China, over 1,700 miles away from Denisova Cave. We know that they had quite a large range that included much of Asia, but a lack of fossil material leaves us with many questions. So what exactly are Denisovans? Where did they come from, and how closely are they related to Homo sapiens or Neanderthals? Mitochondrial DNA extracted from Denisova 3 has provided us with answers to some of these questions. Geneticists can use nucleotide bases of mitochondrial DNA to determine how similar animals' genetics are. With this technique, it is found the difference between modern humans and Neanderthals is approximately 202 bases out of 16,500, so that would be 1.22% different. Denisova 3's mtDNA differs from that of modern humans by 385 bases, so that would be 2.33%. And finally, chimpanzees differ by about 1,462 bases or 8.86%. When looking at these differences, it is easy to make the mistake that different means worse or more primitive. This is simply not the case. In reality, Denisovans had a lot of unique advantageous adaptations, but I will talk about this further in the video. Denisovans, Neanderthals, and Homo sapiens are all related in a very complicated way. Denisovans and Neanderthals mainly evolved in Eurasia, while Homo sapiens evolved in Africa. Their genetic story is so complicated because of many interbreeding events and a very large geographic range. Human evolution is in no way linear, and instead populations of what we would consider more modern humans would occasionally mate with some more primitive groups. When I say modern, I mean humans with smaller jaws, smaller teeth, and bigger brains. Pockets of more archaic humans lived all throughout the world, along with Denisovans, Neanderthals, and Homo sapiens, and a handful of other species. DNA evidence has told us a complicated, often contradicting story about when these three groups diverged from each other. It is generally accepted that the human lineage diverged from the ancestors of Denisovans and Neanderthals about 600,000 years ago. Later, around 400,000 years ago, Denisovans and Neanderthals split. Evidence suggests that Denisovans may have been the descendants of an early migration of Homo erectus that settled in Asia, or more likely descendants of Homo heidelbergensis that eventually went to Asia. It actually might have been a complicated mix of both. Since Denisovans and Neanderthals only split around 400,000 years ago, they were quite similar. But since Denisovans interbred with more archaic hominins like Homo erectus and possibly a yet unknown species, they may have had more archaic genes. The science on how these species are related is very confusing, and there is no simple answer to give. Further research will clarify their relation. It got even more confusing when scientists discovered that there may have been even more than one species of Denisovan. Researchers from Indonesia's University, as well as from New Zealand and Singapore, collected DNA from the 161 modern individuals across a swath of the nation of Islands. They then compared it to the genomes from other modern-day humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. Okay, well, I just realized I've been saying Denisovan this whole time, when correctly it's pronounced Denisovan, so I'm going to be saying that for the rest of the video. They used the modern-day fragments of Denisovan DNA to reconstruct what those ancient populations may have looked like. The result is a trove of data on the ancient hominins, one that substantially deepens our understanding of their lives. Perhaps the most significant way that the new genetic evidence alters our conception of the Denisovans is that it reveals them to be much more diverse. In some modern Indonesians, scientists found not one but two distinct Denisovan genomic signatures. These two groups also look different from the Denisovans previously found in Siberia, which researchers say was another group altogether. This actually explains a lot about why their genetics are so confusing and sometimes contradictory. Being spread across so wide an area for so long and interbreeding with modern and archaic hominins is a reason for their diversification into multiple lineages. The three groups were bound by two large geographical barriers: the Himalayas in the east and the oceanic gaps between the islands that make up Indonesia today. I say three groups, but in reality there might have been more. Scientists just say at least three groups. As researchers see it, one group of Denisovans would have lived in and around present-day Siberia, Kazakhstan, and in China just north of the Himalayas. And the remains from members of this group are likely what researchers found in 2010 in Denisova Cave. But a different group of Denisovans lived in Southeast Asia, around what is now Thailand and Vietnam. The third group called the Islands of Indonesia home. These two southern groups diverged from the Siberian Denisovans over 250,000 years ago. That's before anatomically modern humans even appeared. And at least one of these groups survived well into the Pleistocene, dying out just tens of thousands of years ago. At least three very distinct Denisovan populations were in existence and have contributed to modern human genomes. One of the groups that showed up in the Papuans' genome actually looked so genetically distinct that Murray Cox of New Zealand's Massey University says they would have likely been considered an entirely new species. He said if we are going to call Neanderthals and Denisovans by a unique name, which we do, then we should probably call this other group by another name. While the researchers cannot name a species without actual fossil evidence, Cox says that genetically, the group living in Southeast Asia looked as different from Denisovans in Siberia as it did from Neanderthals. It just shows how much there is to discover about these hominins. I can't wait for some remains of these distinct Denisovans to be found, and maybe they will constitute an entire new species. I have a feeling that some remains will be found in Southeast Asia, but for now all I can do is hope. Another important discovery worth mentioning is an interbreeding event between the ancestors of Denisovans and Neanderthals and a population of so-called super-archaic hominins. The newly discovered episode involves interbreeding over 700,000 years ago. It happened before Denisovans and Neanderthals split off. The super-archaic and Neanderthal-Denisovan ancestor populations were more distantly related than any other pair of human populations previously known to interbreed. For example, modern humans and Neanderthals at most had been separated for about 750,000 years when they interbred. The super-archaics and Neanderthal-Denisovan ancestors were separated for well over 1 million years. 4% of the Denisovan genome comes from this unknown archaic human species which diverged from modern humans over 1 million years ago. This sheds new light on just how distantly human populations can be separated and successfully mate. Modern humans would end up inheriting some of these genes when we interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans. So what did Denisovans actually look like? Not much is known about the precise anatomical features of these people, but we can still tell a lot with the fossils we have. The finger bone is similar to the same bone in modern humans. In fact, it is nearly indistinguishable from Homo sapiens. In contrast, the molars are much different than ours. They are large and robust, similar to that of Middle Pleistocene archaic humans. The third molar is just outside the range of any Homo species except habilis and Homo rudolfensis. It is more like that of Australopithecines. The second molar is larger than those of modern humans and Neanderthals and is more similar to that seen in Homo erectus and habilis. This suggests that perhaps their diet consisted of more tough vegetation and unprocessed food. They likely had a diverse diet of roots and tubers, nuts, fruits, marine resources, and meat. Their jaws were large and powerful to process all of this tough food. The parietal bone discovery is reminiscent of that of Homo erectus. A facial reconstruction of Deni has been generated by comparing methylation at individual genetic loci associated with facial structure. This analysis suggested that Denisovans, much like Neanderthals, had long, broad, and projecting faces. A large nose, sloping forehead, protruding jaw, elongated and flattened skull, and a wide chest and hips. Their bodies were stout like Neanderthals, and they were likely shorter than modern humans and were well suited for their cold environment. Their brain size is unknown, but it is likely very similar to that of a Neanderthal. Neanderthals had larger brains than Homo sapiens, but bigger does not mean better. Denisovans may have had larger brains than us, but like Neanderthals, the volume was used for heightened senses rather than a larger prefrontal cortex. They are still not dumb by any means. Studying intelligence of hominins in the fossil record is extremely hard. Genes for intelligence and brain volume can be studied, but we don't have a skull of a Denisovan. Regardless, they were humans with the human capacity to reason and logic. They may have even wondered about the same universal questions that we do. Why are we here? Where do we come from? And what's the point? They were not subhumans or on the border of becoming human. They were human. Remember, they are only 385 base pairs away from us out of just 16,500. And you see I used the word different, not less, just different. From genes alone, we cannot know how an animal thinks or behaves. But if you brought a Denisovan to present day, it could likely learn the same things that makes us human. Their genes tell us that they had darker skin, how much so we're not exactly sure. You could also imagine different groups had different shades of color. They also are thought to have brown hair and brown eyes. Again, Denisovans were not uniform. Just look at the diversity in modern humans. much different color and other physical attributes. Denisovans were much more diverse of a species than us, and like mentioned earlier, they may have been multiple species. It would be correct to say that these three groups looked much different from each other. Maybe some had lighter skin to cope with a lack of sunlight in cold environments, or maybe some had a pronounced epicanthal fold like seen in modern humans living in Asia. Facial and skeletal reconstructions have been made using genetics and comparing them to Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Overall, they were similar to Neanderthals but may have looked very different. It is unfortunate that we currently have such little fossil evidence of these people. However, we do have some interesting artifacts that were likely produced by Denisovans. Early Middle Paleolithic stone cores from Denisova Cave show us a variety of techniques that were used to process the stone. Actual tools created during this time include scrapers, denticulate tools, and notch tools. Since it was the early Middle Paleolithic, these tools were very old. The oldest deposits were probably older than 287,000 years ago in the main chamber and 269,000 years ago in the southern chamber. Middle Paleolithic assemblages predominantly contain side scrapers, notch denticulate tools, end scrapers, burins, chisel-like tools, and trunicated flakes. These date to 156,000 years ago in the main chamber and 58,000 years ago in the east chamber. In upper Paleolithic layers, there were very interesting bone tools and elaborate ornaments. A marble ring, an ivory ring, an ivory pendant, a red deer tooth pendant, an elk tooth pendant, a chloridolite bracelet, and a bone needle. However, Denisovans are only confirmed to have inhabited the cave until 55,000 years ago, and the dating of these artifacts overlaps with modern human migration into the relative area. It remains unclear what species made these artifacts, but it very well could have been Denisovans. Denisovans mated with Homo sapiens long ago. Since they mainly lived in the east, their genes are concentrated there. Southeast Asians have the highest degree of Denisovan DNA. A 2011 study found that Denisovan DNA is prevalent in Australian Aborigines, Near-Oceanians, Polynesians, Fijians, Eastern Indonesians, and Mamminwans. Interestingly, it was not found in the same degree in East Asians, Western Indonesians, Jahi people from Malaysia, or Anji from Andaman Islands. This tells us that introgression with Denisovans occurred mainly within the Pacific region rather than on the Asian mainland like once thought. Introgression is the transfer of genetic information from one species to another as a result of hybridization between them and repeated backcrossing. In the Melanesian genome, about 4 to 6% or 1.9 to 3.4% derives from Denisovan introgression. New Guineans and Australian Aborigines have the most Introgressed DNA. In Papuans, less Denisovan ancestry is seen in the X chromosome than autosomes, and some autosomes also have less Denisovan ancestry, which could indicate hybrid incompatibility. The former observation could be explained by less female Denisovan introgression into modern humans, or more female modern human immigrants who diluted Denisovan X chromosome ancestry, which could mean that Homo sapien women were seen as more attractive to not only Homo sapiens but perhaps to Denisovans as well. Denisovan ancestry in mainland Asians and Native Americans was only about 0.2%. South Asians were found to have levels of Denisovan admixture similar to that seen in East Asians. A 2008 study of Han Chinese, Japanese, and Dagonomes showed that modern human East Asians have DNA from two different Denisovan populations, one similar to the Denisovan DNA found in Papuan genomes, and a second that is closer to the Denisovan genome from Denisova Cave. This could indicate two different introgression events involving two different Denisovan populations. In South Asian genomes, DNA only came from the same single Denisovan introgression seen in Papuans. A 2019 study found a third wave of Denisovans which introgressed into East Asians. Introgression into modern humans may have occurred as recently as 30,000 years ago in New Guinea, which if correct could indicate this population persisted as late as 14,500 years ago. So how does Denisovan ancestry affect modern humans? The Denisovan genome also consists of a variant region around the EPAS1 gene that in Tibetans assists with adaptation to low oxygen levels at high elevation. So the remaining genes of Denisovans in these mountainous places tell us that they were adapted to high elevations. They also have a gene that affects body fat distribution in Inuit populations. In Papuans, a people with some of the most Denisovan DNA, Denisovan alleles have the highest frequency in genes expressed in bones and other tissue. Papuans also benefit from genes involving with both immunity to infectious diseases and metabolism. Denisovan genes may have been very important in helping early modern humans migrating out of Africa. Genes that helped them adapt to higher elevations and stronger immune systems would have certainly helped us in our migration and eventual domination. A 2021 study on the genetic basis of facial features in Latin Americans found interesting results. The 1p12 region of their genome shows evidence of adaptive integration from archaic humans. This genomic region has been previously reported to be associated with features of the outer ear and face, but in this study it was found to mainly affect lip thickness in Latin Americans. This gene also affects Greenlandic, Inuits, and various Asian and Native American populations. What a fascinating discovery. I should note, however, that there's a lot of genes affecting facial shape, and just because they have a lip shape gene from Denisovans doesn't mean the rest of their face resembles the Denisovan. Very interesting to think that some of the racial diversity seen in modern humans is a direct result of breeding with other extinct human species. I don't want anyone to make any racist conclusions though. Having archaic human ancestry does not mean a modern human is any better or worse. Everyone has some degree of either Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA. Sub-Saharan Africans have the least amount of Neanderthal or Denisovan DNA, but they still have a very small amount. A point I want to make about these people is just how adaptive they were. We know that they not only lived in the frigid cold of Siberia, but also the tropical environments of Southeast Asia. Surviving nature is no easy task for any animal, let alone human. They were masters of their environment. Though their knowledge did not lie in mathematics or literature, they knew their world and more importantly how to navigate its challenges. They made complicated tools and a lot of things that we just don't have evidence for. Great beasts were slain, many starved, but over hundreds of thousands of years they survived. So what was their ultimate downfall? Where did they go and why do they only live within our genes? We currently do not have a complete answer to this question. We may never have a good answer. Obviously there are no Denisovans still on Earth. Previously it was thought that Denisovans may have gone extinct about 50,000 years ago. And this may be true for the Siberian populations, but like mentioned previously, through DNA we have found that Denisovans may have survived until about 14,500 years ago. The same study done by Murray Cox that found that there might have been more than one species of Denisovan also found that our species may have been interbreeding with Denisovans as recently as 15,000 years ago. Humans have been living in that area for over 50,000 years. The Denisovans living in mainland Asia were either outcompeted or assimilated long ago. But it seems populations survived in Australasia much longer. This is why the density of Denisovan DNA is much higher there. Ultimately, the species went extinct, but we are such close relatives and some of us contain a significant amount of their DNA. So are they really extinct? Humans often think of ourselves as separate from nature. It is easy to think considering how far we have separated ourselves from the world that gave life to us. Anthropocentrism is the belief that human beings are the most important entity in the universe, that we are better than animals that we share the earth with. It has been the driving force for creation stories across millennia. In reality, we grew out of the world below us over millions of years. In this series, I hope to tell the world about the vibrant history we all share. What excites me is just how much more there is to learn about our past. It is amazing how a whole species of human can be compressed into one finger bone, yet we have nearly complete skeletons of dinosaurs from millions of years ago. Thanks for watching. Again, I plan to do every human species, but these videos take a very long time to make. I will only release one about once a month, but we'll see. So have a great day, and I'll see you on the next episode of Ortho 2. See ya!
What is that? What is that? That shit look like a big hot shell push.
Bruh.
That shit like a fucking rat.
That's what I'm saying.
Bruh.
Watching SpongeBob and Scooby-Doo.
We're so big and strong. Ever since you're gone.
Stinky! Poop! Funny poopies!